Hello, it's Deborah from the attic, and today I have the latest Simon Says stamp kit for you. Let's see what's inside. I'm going to start with a card, and there is a plain white card. There is an embossed card from Tonic. This is called Golden Waves, and it's a shimmery blue on the front and it's a plain black on the reverse. The stamp set is called Beautiful Mermaids, and there's so much on this stamp. There are 3 nicely sized mermaids, so this one is a nice size for positioning on the bottom left or right corner of a card. This one would go beautifully down the side of a card, and this one would stretch diagonally across a card. So I think they've been really well thought out and designed to make it easier for you to get maximum impact on your card. There's lots of sea creatures as well. There's some fish and a turtle. There's bubbles. I really like the bubbles. I think they're going to be very useful. There's a treasure chest. There's all kinds of little sea plants down the bottom as well, and lots of sentiments on that card. And I think that's going to be quite fun to see how they can be grouped together to make a joint sentiment, or maybe cut, maybe. Then there are 2 envelopes. I really like the colours of these envelopes. They are metallic lavender, this one, and metallic white. As we know, envelopes don't always remain as envelopes in my kits. There is a lovely shimmery shiny piece of card. This is 6-inch square and it's called Aqua, and it's glimmer paper, so it's plain on the reverse. There are some lovely sequins here. These are a dull gold and they're called treasure chest sequins. And then there's all this. This is really good because these are all useful. These are all going to be great for your stash, including the lollipop. But this is a beautiful embossing powder. This is ultra fine. It's called Mermaid, and it's blue, but there's a hint of some gold in there, as if there's treasure in there. I think that's a lovely colour. I'm looking forward to trying that one. There are 2 of the new, not just 1, 2 of the new Distress Oxides that were released recently. That's a mermaid just coming in with a call there for me. This one is called Stormy Sky. This one is called Tumbled Glass. And there is also, as if 2 ink pads wasn't enough, there's a 3rd ink pad. This is a clear embossing and watermark ink pad. I use this an awful lot. I go through quite a lot of these because I tend to gunk them up quite quickly. So I'm delighted that this is in the kit. So let's go ahead and see what cards we can make with this kit. For card 1, I'm going to stamp the seated mermaid in black ink onto the top of a piece of white card, and I'm going to leave myself space at the bottom of that card because I'm going to need that later on in the process. So there's my mermaid all stamped up, and I've coloured her with normal coloured pencils, and I'm going to give her a little bit of sparkle on her costume by adding some clear glitter from using a Nuvo pen that was included in a previous Simon Says stamp kit. That will give her tail a really nice little shimmer. Now I'm going to work out where I'm going to cut. So I just want to decide, am I going to cut where the rocks end, where her tail ends? You can decide how big you want the space at the bottom of the card to be. And I'm going to use a mixture of my craft knife, I actually use a scalpel, and some decoupage scissors to get into the little tight corners of this stamp. I'm going to cut around all of the area above my pencil line. There we are, she's all cut out above the pencil line, and I've got a nice cut out figure and I've got a nice space below. I've inked up the sentiment that says Happy Birthday Beautiful, and I'm going to heat emboss that using the Simon Says Stamp Ultrafine Mermaid embossing powder that was included in the kit. Once that's set, I'm going to cut off the lower portion of that white card that I don't think I will need, because I'm going to position this on the bottom of a white top folding card, and I want that lovely tonic shimmery paper, the embossed paper, to go behind my little mermaid. I'm going to use my pencil just to make a mark so I know where I need to cut off the excess. Now that that's cut down, I've got plenty left over, which is great because hopefully I'll be able to use that on another card, and I'm just going to glue that and stick it on place on the top of my white top folding card. I'm going to get myself some craft foam. I use this quite a lot because I want to raise up my Little Mermaid. So I'm going to cut out a section from my craft foam, which is about maybe 2-3 millimeters deep, and I'm just going to do some, as you can see, some very random cutting out to make sure that I cover all of the reverse of my mermaid and the sentiment. That will give dimension to the card. I love craft foam, I use it quite a lot, and I'm going to be using it a lot in this video as well. It's very, very versatile, and I find it easier and faster to use than craft foam pads, say. So there's my Little Mermaid, all positioned, and she stands out nicely from that embossed paper background. I'm going to add some detail and some sparkle with the sequins that are included in the kit as well. So I'm adding in some little dots of glue, and once I've decided exactly how many dots I want to add and not adding too many. I always seem to add too many. I don't really want to. I just want it to be subtle. So just a few drops, and then I'll stick my sequins on top, and then my card is complete. To begin card 2, I've used one of my round die cutters to cut out a circle from the bottom of the card. I'm going to show you a little trick now how you can use your alcohol pens to get more out of them. So I've attached a felt pad to the bottom of one of normally my foam applicators, and I'm just dabbing the colour from the pens onto that piece of felt, and I'm going to stipple it over my card base. This is a great way to use colours that you might not have in your alcohol inks in your bottled form, but you may have in pens. So this is a good way to use them. And I also happen to have a bottle of silver, one of the metallic mixables in the alcohol ink range, so I'm going to use that to add a little bit of silver sparkle. If you don't have that, it doesn't matter at all. Just go with the colours that you have and just keep pouncing onto your card base until you have the depth and variety of colour that you want. This is white self-adhesive paper, and I use it to make stickers. When I've got a lot to get through, it's a great cheat, and I'm going to use a dye-based black ink because that will allow me to colour my images in Copic markers or alcohol pen markers if I want to without smudging the black ink. I'm using my stamping platform to stamp out a myriad of mermaids, and I'm going to fill in the blanks on this sheet of paper with all the other little images that I want to include. Now, I have a Brother Scan and Cut, which is a fantastic resource for doing a lot of things quickly. So I can pop this in the machine, I can ask it to cut around the outline of the shapes on my sticker sheet, and it will do this in about 6 minutes. I use this method to make stickers quite a lot in my personal journaling, so I like to stamp out an image, cut it out, and then use the sticker to stick into my Filofax. I use a Filofax planner. Here is the finished result. Here's my lovely Little Mermaid, and I'll put her against some white cards so you can see how nicely cut out she is. I could do this myself, but it would take me a lot longer. And as you can see, if I remove the top piece, there she is. She's all sticky, ready to glue onto whatever card or project I want to use. Now I'm taking 3 colours of alcohol markers, and I'm just going to use these to colour in her tail. But I wanted to show you how I do this. I'm no colouring expert, but the way that I do it is I start with the palest colour and I fill in all of the shape, and then I'll take the next darker colour and I'll go around the outside edges, or where I think there will be shadows or where I think there should be darker shades. This is why I'm using 3, because you get a better effect with 3 if you start light, medium, dark, and then I'll show you what happens after I apply the dark colour. So this is the darkest in my range, and I'm just adding this into all of those little dark spaces on the tail, anywhere there's a hint of a shadow. And then once I've finished adding all of the darkest sections, I go back to my palest colour and I use that to blend it all in. That works for me. When my mermaid is complete, I will add her to my card that was prepared earlier. And I'm going to stick her down onto my card, but I'm not going to stick that base card onto the white card underneath. I want to make sure I position the sentiment that I want to use in the right place in that circle of white behind my mermaid. So I'm keeping her in position, I'm stamping that sentiment down, and then I'm going to use the embossing powder to go over that, and I'll heat set it. Only once that's heat set and I'm happy with the position of it will I then go ahead and glue my top design in place. I'm going to use my craft foam again to make this stand out a little bit. It's glued on the reverse, and I will just stick that down onto my base card. I'm going to use some acrylic blocks to weight this down and help it stick. And then my card is finished. I've got a small piece of watercolour card for card 3, and this is hot pressed, which means that it's flat and it's smooth, it's not textured. I'm going to use my foam applicator to cover this with some of the Distress Oxide that was included in the kit, and I'm going to add a little bit of texture by using the acrylic blocks that I normally use for stamping. I'm going to dip these into some water, which I've sprayed onto my mat, and then I'm going to position them on my piece of blue card that I've inked up, and I'm going to let them sit there for a moment so that the water can penetrate into the card, and that will give me an effect of bubbles. If you don't have these acrylic blocks, don't worry, just use anything you have that's got a round base and a little bit of weight to it that you can just press down onto your card. I'm going to mop it all up with some kitchen paper, and then you should be able to see the effect a little bit. It's very subtle, but it just adds a little bit of extra interest to my piece of base card. Now I've cut out a frame using the lovely blue sparkly paper, and I just want to make sure that that fits nicely, and it does. So my next thing is to add my sentiment, and I'm using a plain black ink to do this. These are some of my little stickers that I cut out earlier, and I've coloured them in a sort of a peachy blue colour, and I'm going to just take off the cover paper on the reverse and stick them onto my card. Then I can position everything in place and glue it onto my white top folding base card. And again, I'm going to use an acrylic block to weight it down and help everything stick nicely. And with that, my card is finished. That's a nice simple little card. I'm going to begin card 4 by inking up my sentiment using the Simon Says Stamp clear ink pad. And then I'm going to use some white embossing powder to heat set this sentiment. I've cut this out and I've added a little fishtail on the left hand side. Now I'm going to work with some watercolour effects. So I'm using an acrylic block to add a smoosh of the Distress Oxide pads that were included in the kit, and I'm going to use a spritz of water on my card as well as onto my block where the inks are. I'm also going to use a water brush to help me distribute those inks, and I'm going to keep spritzing and spraying and adding water from my brush just by squeezing the water down through the brush on the end to help me get an effect of water dripping off the end of the card. So I'm angling the card so that those drips can just find their own way to the end of the card. I don't want it to be too engineered or too precise. I want it to look nice and watery. I'm going to use some kitchen paper to catch the drips at the end and make sure that those drips don't pool at the top of my card. I want them to look as if they're flowing off the top of my card. And then I'm going to use my craft gun just to dry the colours off. Now I'm going to take a little bit of the embossing powder that was included in the kit, and I'm going to use just the edge of I don't know what that tool is, but the edge of that tool to just drop a little bit of that glitter, a little sprinkle of the glitter over the card, not too much, and then I'm going to heat from below. I can't begin by heating it from the top because otherwise the embossing powder will just blow away everywhere because there's nothing actually anchoring it onto the paper. But it will give a nice little shimmer at the top of the card. I'm going to mask off the fold in the card, and I'm going to add a little bit of a border by using my foam applicator and one of the inks that came in the kit to add a tiny little border around the outside edge. It doesn't have to fill in the whole card because that won't be seen. That's my border prepared, and now I'm going to take my original top design. I'm going to add glue to the back, and then I can turn it over and I can glue it onto my border, and that way all of those colours match beautifully. I've got my sentiment from earlier on and I can glue that into position, and I've got my little treasure chest that I've coloured in. This is one of my stickers from earlier. I've coloured that in along with some of the coral and some of those green fronds, and I can stick all of those in place. When my pieces are all stuck down, I'm going to use my clear glitter gloss pen again, and I'm going to add a little bit of extra sparkle inside that trunk where the jewels are. That will give it a lovely shine and shimmer. I've got a few other ways of filling that trunk, and I'll show you those in later cards. This is a pen that came in an earlier Simon Says stamp kit. I use the clear glitter pen quite a lot, especially on mermaids. I want to add a little bit of extra interest and gold bling to my card, so once again I'm adding spots of glue, and then I'm going to drop the sequins onto the glue dots. And with that, my card is complete. For card 5, I've cut out a white card frame, and I'm using my foam pad applicator and my ink to colour that up. That's a lovely soft blue. It's a beautiful, beautiful colour. Now I'm going to take a piece of acetate. This is actually heat embossing acetate, which I forgot that I had. So I'm going to do my trick again with my embossing powder, and I'm going to drop that onto the acetate, and sure enough, it doesn't warp or twist. I hadn't realised just how good this was. So I had a bit of fun playing with this, and I secured the embossing powder onto the acetate, and that will give my shaker card, because that's what we're going to make, a little extra interest. And I'm going to use my tape runner to glue up the reverse of my frame, and then I can stick my acetate into the frame. I've got one of my mermaids that I previously cut out, and I've coloured her in, and I'm going to stick her to the side of the frame. I want her to be quite dominant in this card, and again I'm using my craft foam. I'm going to cut out some thin strips this time, and I'm going to use my glue, and I'm going to stick them to the inside of the frame to raise it up. I have a white top folding card, and I'm going to add a little bit of a blue border to this because I don't want it to be too plain. Now I can position my mermaid. I want to add a sentiment, so once again I'm going to be a little bit careful about using the top piece to help me decide whereabouts I'm going to add that sentiment. I'm going to show you a trick to make sure that we get that positioned exactly where we want it. So that's where I want it to be, but when I apply that to an acrylic block, how will I know? Well, I'm going to use the corner. So as long as I line up the corner of my acetate block with the bottom right corner of my card, I know I will get that sentiment in the right position. There we go. So when I put my frame over the top, it's exactly where I need it to be. Now it's time to add the sequins that will sit inside my shaker card, and I'm going to glue up the reverse of my frame, and I'm going to stick everything into position. As always, I need to check that my shaker card works. Shake, shake. Yes, it does. And that's my card finished. For card 6, I've cannibalised the envelope. You knew it was going to happen, didn't you? It was such a pretty pearlised colour. I've cut out a frame, and I'm going to apply this to a white side folding card. I have another piece that I've cut out as well, which is slightly larger than the aperture of the piece of card you can see on the right of the screen. So my extra little purple piece will go in the middle. The only reason I did it this way is because I hate to lose paper. I want to make sure I get the maximum I can out of it. So I've gutted it, and I cut out 2 frames. I'm going to use my white aperture frame again to help me position my sentiment. I've added a couple of sentiments together in this card, and the star attraction is the little pearl that sits in the top, so I'm going to glue that into position and stick it on my card, and that's my card finished. It's very plain and simple. There's no ornamentation around the white frame either. And again, I'm using my craft foam. You can see how versatile this is. I'm using my craft foam to give the card a little bit of dimension and lift that frame away from the inside design. And again, I'm using my block just to make sure I get that glued down nicely. Nice simple card. For card 7, this is great fun. I've taken all of those tiny little elements, the fish and the starfish and the shell and all of those little things. I've put them onto a block, and I'm using the Simon Says Stamp clear ink pad to ink them up and stick them onto a white card. Now at this stage you can't see anything that's really happening here, but you will be able to see this if you try it for yourself. Once I've used my block to stamp down all of my little creatures, I'm taking some white embossing powder, and I'm going to sprinkle that over them, and then I'm going to heat set them. This allows me to see where all of my little creatures are, and then I'm going to add more. I'm going to fill in the blanks so I really fill that sheet with the little sea creatures. Once that's finished, I'm going to take my Distress Oxide ink that came in the pack, and I'm going to add another one, which is called Shaded Lilac, to this card, just to give it a little bit of different colour. And as you can see, I'm taking my foam applicator and I'm just smudging the inks together over that card. And that makes the little sea creatures stand out beautifully against the background. I've taken another piece of the blue embossed paper, and I've cut a strip, and I've also cut a strip from my envelope again, and I've heat set that with one of the sentiments and the picture of the pearl in the shell. I've used white embossing powder to do that, and I'm going to add that as a little banner across the bottom of my card. I'm going to glue everything into position, and then because there will be a little bit of overhang, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm just going to trim that down. I'm going to keep the white theme of the embossed little creatures on the front of the card going by adding this to a white top folding card. And once I glue everything into position, my card will be complete. For card 8, I've added a piece of removable tape across the bottom part of a card, and I don't want to ink anything below that part of my card. So I'm using the two inks from the kit. I'm starting with the paler colour, and I'm starting quite bold at the beginning, at the lower part of the card, and then fading it out as I get towards the top of the card. And the darker colour, I'm going to just focus on that at the bottom of that, at the bottom of the card. Now I'm taking some water spray and I'm just going to spritz that onto this card, and I'm going to mop up the excess with a little pad of kitchen paper. That makes it look like there are little spots of white in my ink. And then I can remove my removable tape, and you can see you get a beautiful clear line below where your ink is. I've got my Simon Says Stamp clear ink pad again, and I'm inking up my treasure chest. I'm going to use a gold embossing powder this time because I really want to make this treasure chest zing. I've heat set the gold, and I'm going to use a couple of different coloured brown pens that I use. These are the clear colour watercolour ink pens, and I'm going to use those just to add a little bit of colour and dimension to my treasure chest, and I'm going to blend it all in with my water pen. My trunk has loads of shimmer and shine, which you'll be able to see as I move this around as I cut it out. There it is, looking all shiny. And I'm going to position this on my card. So I've started positioning the other elements of my card, and this is how I think I want it to look. I'm going to add my sentiment in plain black ink that says "Beauty comes from within." I've got those fronds, those sea plants, and I'm going to colour these in using my clean colour watercolour brushes. And I'm using two different colours of green. To create the effect of jewels inside the trunk, I've used some stickles that I had in my old stash, and I tested some out on the top right corner of my page before I began to make sure I was happy with the colour mixes. Now I can mount the whole design onto a piece of black top folding card. For card 9, I'm inking up my mermaid. I've chosen the one that looks most mermaid-like in terms of the shape, because what's important for this card isn't the front of the mermaid, it's the back of the mermaid. What I want to do is create an outline, a shadow of a mermaid. So I'm cutting around her tail, but I'm taking away the bits that I think confuse the eye. So I'm removing the shell, and you see what I mean there. I've just gone with straight lines because when you view it from the reverse, it looks more like a mermaid shape. So I'm only leaving in place the pieces that I think will help inform the eye and educate the viewer that this is a mermaid. So you can see that some of the hair looks a little strange on her back. I'm going to remove that, and I'm also going to cut deeper in towards the neck. So I'm taking away that hairline, and all the time checking it from the other side to make sure it looks like a mermaid. I'm going to colour the reverse of my mermaid with the darker oxide ink that came as part of the kit. This is a Stormy Sky colour. I will be doing more work on this in a moment, but that's how my mermaid looks. I'm really pleased with her. I think she looks lovely, but I'm just going to take away a little bit more from that hairline. Now I want to give a different effect on the background of my card. So I'm using my crocodile. You can use any hole punch that you have, and I'm just punching out some holes into a piece of plain card. I'm going to ink up a piece of watercolour paper, and I'm using a blend of the 2 inks that came as part of the kit and another lavender ink that I have as well, and I'm just blending them all together on a piece of card. I want to put them on quite thickly because when I remove them I want that to be more obvious and more visible. So now I'm going to get my little stencil that I've made myself with the water bubbles in it, and I've got a piece of tissue, and I'm going to add some water, just spritz some water onto my tissue, and I'm going to press that tissue. I'm not going to swipe it, I'm just pressing it down through each of those little holes to make sure I remove as much of that ink as I can. And that's the effect that you get. The real fun of this kit has been in creating your own background papers because there weren't pattern papers included as part of the kit. Now I'm going to move on to the next part of my mermaid, and I'm going to use the embossing powder. I'm going to also use the very, very useful clear ink pad that came in the kit. I'm just using my acrylic block just to press the mermaid into the ink without getting too much of it on my hands, and now I'm sprinkling loads of the embossing powder over her. I'm going to pull in my embossing board, and this is just like a chopping board that I use when I have to emboss, and I'm going to heat set my mermaid. That gives her a lovely shimmer. She's got a lovely outline. So I'm going to do a little bit of sprinkling with some white embossing powder, much as I did earlier on, and I'm heating this from below, and then when I'm sure that it's got a little bit of grab on the card, I can heat it from above. I've stamped a sentiment on black card and used white heat embossing powder to make that stick out, and I'm going to glue my whole design onto a piece of black top folding card. And just to the side of me you can see that I've also added craft foam to my mermaid because that will help her stand out a little bit more. I'm using a block just to help me press down the glue. So I'm going to bring in some glue and add that to the reverse of my mermaid, and then I'm going to stick her into position. Because of the angle of her hand, I'm going to give her one of the little shells that I cut out earlier on as a sticker. I'm going to pop that into her hand, and I'm going to get my clear glitter pen, my Nuvo clear glitter pen, and I'm going to add a little bit of shimmer onto that shell. It looks as if she's fanning herself with the shell. That's my card complete. For card 10, I've taken a couple of pieces of muslin cloth and I've spritzed them over with some diluted vintage photo. I use this for making my journals, so I always have this stuff on hand. I just want to add a little bit of extra colour to the pieces of muslin. And I've got a piece of craft card, and I'm using my tape runner to adhere the cloth to the card below. I've actually got 3 layers of this cloth because I'm going to layer up the elements of my card. I've coloured in a little selection of some of the items that I cut out earlier on, and I'm adding some of these below the fabric and some of them above the fabric. I want it to look like it's a fishing net that's captured a whole load of different things in there. I can glue these into position, and if there's a little bit of glue left over, or if I want to give the base of my fronds, I want it to look like they're anchored somewhere, I can just roll over the cloth a little bit and make it look as if they're coming out from the cloth. So some are behind, some are in front. I've added a very simple little sentiment on white card that says "See treasure in the simple things," and I'm also going to add some little white dots again with my glue so that I can add sequins onto the top of this and make it all a little bit more magical. And once I've glued those into position, my card is done. Now I'm going to leave you with a little music and some close-ups of all of the cards that we've made today. Thank you for watching, as always. I hope we meet again soon, and in the meantime, take care.